feel free to drop off if you need to. We do understand that there may be some pressing issues wherever you are. While we would love to have you through the whole meetup, we are understanding if you need to jump off the call. And generally what we do is we ask you to post questions that you may have as the talk is going in the Zoom chat. Myself, Benny, and Roberto will curate the questions as they come in, and we'll allow some time towards the end to ask the speaker the questions that you dropped in. So feel free to just, as the talk is going, just drop your questions in the Zoom chat. And then I'm just going to quickly share my screen and just go through some tech leadership oriented stuff. So as a start, we'd just like to say thank you to our official Meetup sponsors. So that is Peach Payments and OfferZen for supporting our community and helping us host these online events and our in-person events. So Peach Payments makes online commerce and digital payment acceptance easier and more accessible across Africa. If this is something you're interested in or your company could be interested in, please check them out at peachpayments.com. And then OfferZen, where our speaker for tonight is actually from too. OfferZen is an online job marketplace by developers for developers. So if you're an engineer looking for a new job, perhaps check out OfferZen as a platform you could use to help find you your next opportunity. Or if your company is recruiting and you're interested in finding more developers, have a look at OfferZen.com. And then tech leadership. For those who've been here before, you will know we have a newsletter that we are always marketing. For those that haven't been, our newsletter is released once a month. What it is a curated list of tech leadership content that we would have found in the previous month that we believe will help you learn and grow in your tech leadership journey. This was the previous one that we sent out in March. So it goes out right after the meetup. So tonight we'll be sending out another one at the end of the meetup. And this is just an example, as I say, just a list of curated content that just helps you learn and grow in your engineering space. I'll share links to everything I'm talking about now once I've finished the intros, and then you can just click on there and follow whichever platforms we're talking about. We also have a Twitter account. So if you are on Twitter and you prefer Twitter instead, we also have a tech leadership Twitter space. We also, that is more frequent. So at least once a day, there's a tweet that is talking about tech leadership material we found, again, curated. And we'll also share events that are coming up. So you'll see, like yesterday, we reminded people that we will be doing today's talk, but also we have interesting details, interesting links and content about tech leadership that you may want to check out. So if you are a Twitter user and you prefer going that route, have a look at that. OfferZen, our sponsors, are offering a chance for people attending this meetup to win some swag. I will share the link to this form. It will look like this once you click on it. And then when you click on claim my shirt, you fill in your details and they'll be in touch with you if you are one of the lucky people who are going to get some swag from OfferZen. So thanks to OfferZen for that. And I'll drop a link to that after this. And then to our speaker. So our speaker is the CTO of OfferZen, must be a very popular individual. We received the most RSVPs we received for an online talk for this talk. So we're excited, really excited about the talk. The talk has an interesting topic. So it's techniques for terrible technical leadership. So it's great that so many people RSVP'd for that particular talk. And without taking too much time from the speaker's talk, we'll hand over the screen to them now and stop sharing. So excited to hear your talk.
Thanks, Sanaka. Okay, let me just share my screen. Okay, hopefully everyone is seeing llama and its spaceship. Yes. Okay, let me start. Okay, thank you so much for the opportunity to give a talk tonight. Thanks everyone for joining. I've been to some of these tech leadership meetups, and they're always awesome, so glad to be contributing. So tonight I'll be talking about techniques for table technical leadership, which doesn't make a lot of sense, and I'm really surprised that there's so many people that showed up. But yeah, without further ado, let me dive into it. So just quickly, something about myself. So hello, I'm Gijs. If you are having difficulty pronouncing my name, you can think of the sound a cat makes, like, and then like an ace of spades, and just like combine those, like Gijs. So think of like cats playing poker, and you'll be all set. I've got 2 daughters, both quite young. So if you hear any screaming in the background, apologies. My wife is going to be herding them tonight. I'm from Sirius. It's not a fictional place, as many people think. You can find it on Google Maps. I enjoy sleeping, which I don't get a lot of because of my daughters. I enjoy nature and building things. I am quite proud of the jungle gym I built by myself. It was a 3-person job, according to the manual. My wife and my then 2-year-old daughter helped. Wife resigned after 5 minutes, and I had to reallocate my daughter because she wasn't putting her weight. And I've got a YouTube video with 7.4 million views. So that's something, I guess. Cool. So just a quickly overview of like my journey and why I'm giving this talk. So I started out my career building factory automation as a mechatronical engineer. It was quite fun, but the lead time for doing any mechanical design is like a year, so or cycle time. So it's not incredibly fulfilling. And then I always had the dream of building robots. So one of my friends convinced me to sort of join him in a startup to build robots. So I jumped into the startup waters. It was quite choppy and shark infested, and instead I pivoted to software development. And that's also when I've co-founded Admo, which is gesture recognition or built gesture recognition software. It was some of the most amazing technology I worked with, but business model wasn't fantastic, so which is why the company doesn't exist anymore. I then joined a company to help other companies build MVPs and sort of get them to find product market fit. Very exciting, and exposed me to quite a large number of industries. And then finally in 2016, I joined OfferZen. So at that stage, we were 7-8 people, and we were only sort of helping developers find work in one city. Jump forward 6 years, and I'm still at OfferZen as CTO. And we're about 160 people at the moment, with just over 40 being in our product group. So our product group is both product managers, engineers, platform engineers, and data and BI, because we embrace the cross-functional way of building products. And I think that number might be a bit too low, but yeah, I think we've managed to place candidates in more than 80 cities. Cool. So yeah, at OfferZen, it's been an incredible journey, and I've met so many interesting people and learned so much. And one of the individuals I met while at OfferZen was Pandolf. And I think what some of you might not know is that before joining OfferZen, Pandolf was actually a technical leader at an up-and-coming startup. They weren't a big company. I think there were about 9 people. They only lasted about 3 movies, and they ended with them liquidating their biggest asset, which was the purpose of the mission. But yeah, it wasn't a complete success nor failure. It was also the first time Pandolf was in a leadership role. So to understand like what he had to do to sort of really be good at leadership, he asked some of his friends for advice. One of his friends suggested reading the Techniques for Terrific Technical Leadership by Arion, which is, I'm told, an excellent book. Unfortunately, he got confused and bought Techniques for Terrible Technical Leadership by Sauron. It's not his fault completely. He was listening to it on audiobook, so you never look at the title when you're listening to an audiobook. So we have book club at OfferZen once a quarter, where we discuss books that we all read in the company. And last quarter, he actually proposed reading sort of Techniques for Terrible Leadership. So I am tonight going to just tell you a bit about the book, because it's quite interesting, and hopefully you learn some stuff. So the book is there's 3 chapters in the book. So the first chapter is like how you can prevent innovation, and things that we discuss is hiring, team structures, and design principles. Second chapter is about disempowering teams. So focusing on items such as decision-making, prioritization, alignment, and delegating. And the last chapter is about creating toxic cultures. And they will cover feedback, conflict, and incident management. Okay, so diving right in, let's start with chapter 1, Techniques for Preventing Innovation. So one of the most common techniques that is advised in the book is to hire a homogeneous group of individuals. And you might think it's difficult to do that, because like, where are you going to find those many panels, people like yourself? And it's not actually that difficult. So there's a couple of methods that you can follow to get there. One is to only source people from your own personal networks. And that way is you can sort of maintain sort of that sort of people from similar backgrounds and build up a homogeneous team. You can also make your job ads sort of non-inclusive and use terms like this person should like playing paintball with the dudes on Saturdays, or things like that. That's like good ways to sort of really sort of keep it homogeneous. And then finally, you have to have a biased hiring process. And it sounds tricky to do, but it's really not, because everyone has like a subconscious level of bias. And by not implementing explicitly an unbiased hiring process, you are implicitly running a biased hiring process. So essentially just do nothing and you'll sort it. Cool, and how that limits us in terms of being innovative is by limiting creativity and diversity of thought. Because if you have a homogeneous group of individuals from similar backgrounds, the problem space and the solution space that they have to in their tool belt is very similar. So you're just going to have the same solutions come up all the time. Right. Second technique: keep your developers isolated from everyone. So by that I mean, do not let your developers speak to anyone from product, be in touch with users, anyone from business. Yeah. Historically, this has been hard because we were all physically based in offices. So to do this well, you have to have an office in Cape Town and an office in Joburg, with developers in Cape Town and then everyone else in Joburg. You have to have security guards at the door to show away users that might sort of start talking to developers. Nowadays, it's a lot easier. So you can just have sort of separate Slack accounts for developers and for sort of everyone else. You can, yeah. So it's being remote has essentially made this a lot easier. And why we want to do it is that we want to create user apathy amongst the developers. Because the more apathy you have, the more terrible the products would be that you deliver, and the more slowly you'll deliver them. Because you won't understand what users actually need, what their sort of concerns are, what the actual problems are you want to be solving. So just remember, just give developers solutions, keep them isolated, and you're all set. Next technique, embrace complexity. So those would be sort of applying methods like WHY-me, so not to be confused with YAG-me. So you're gonna need it, and aim for perfection. Perfection isn't 80%, perfection is 100%. It's essential to sort of aim for perfection. I think it was Paul Graham that had a quote, live in the future and build what's missing. Obviously, traveling to the future is impossible, so let's just build all the things, and then when we get to the future, nothing will be missing. So do that. And how that will slow down us in terms of innovation is it will sort of, we will be sitting with quite a lot of complexity in terms of our code base, because when we get to the future, we'll realize this isn't actually what we needed, and now we need a more complex solution to actually allow us to move faster. Okay, so those were sort of good techniques, but it is possible that you fail at preventing innovation. So if you do, then hopefully disempowering your teams will still get you towards your goal, because without your teams, there's no ability for you to innovate. Goal, technique 4, embrace decision paralysis. So decision velocity and decision quality is one of the most important traits a leader should have. They are often the bottleneck for the team making progress, for getting the clarity they need to progress further. And therefore, one of the best things you can do to bottleneck them is to just do nothing. So embrace your inner sloth, your inner sort of chameleon. I think a chameleon moves slowly, and try and make as little decisions as possible over the next 1,000 years. That is like an excellent way to waste your most important commodity, that being time. And not just your time, but also the time of your developers. And doing so, they will be disengaged from work. They will start doubting your ability as a leader, and eventually they'll just resign, which is what we're aiming for. Well, so if you do manage to make some decisions, you would still need to action them. And that's where the next technique comes in, which is embracing bike shedding. So bike shedding comes from the law of triviality, which is also Parkinson's law, which states that any organization will set aside a disproportionate amount of time and effort on trivial matters. And why it's called bike shedding is, imagine having a sort of being on the committee that decide on important matters for like a nuclear power station, and you're faced with either deciding the color for the bike shed or deciding what to do with the nuclear waste. Focusing on the color for the bike shed is a lot easier, and so let's spend a lot of time on that, because we don't want to focus on the hard thing. So that is an excellent technique to again waste a lot of time. And like why that is important is you want to build a positive reinforcement loop for trivial tasks. So in sort of there's a I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with like building tiny habits. It's a behavioral psychology technique that you do to sort of to reinforce tiny habits in your everyday life, and you can use the same type of psychology to make sure that you build a positive reinforcement loop for trivial things. So if you accomplish something that is extremely trivial, celebrate it, buy yourself something, celebrate it at work, post it on LinkedIn, really reinforce that this is something that was worthwhile doing, and get sort of the endorphins to be distributed in the brain, and you will start believing that doing more trivial work is good for you. And yeah, you'll fall into this excellent loop. So next technique is to overload yourself with work. Now, with this, I'm not saying like try and take on a lot of difficult and challenging work. Definitely don't get too tired. What I'm suggesting is use technique 6. They're taking on a lot of trivial work to fill up your calendar in a way that you are inaccessible to your team. So the idea would be to put yourself in a position where you can't really take care of your team because you just don't have the time. It's also important to make sure that your team understands that you are wasting your time on spending your time on trivial work, and you are setting aside a disproportionate amount of time for those items, because that way they'll understand their value with regards to what you value. Right. So another technique that's quite useful is to be highly coupled and loosely aligned. So what I mean with being highly coupled is when a group of individuals or many teams are set up in a structure where they can't make progress without affecting the others in the structure. There's a couple of ways to do this. You can have overlapping responsibilities, so that like you can't really make a decision, you can't move forward without this other person also moving with you. You can have a monolithic code base and not have any code ownership in that code base, so there's no real sense of like who's owning what code, and like any work done there is coupled with other teams. And then being loosely aligned, it's about not having the clarity of like what direction the team should be going. So there's a couple of ways to achieve this. One is to set very ambitious but vague goals and key results. So something like unlock the maximum value for users, something like this. And that will sort of help them not really understand what's going on, but be excited to be moving. And you can also use metrics. But if you do use metrics that people that understand, and make sure that you don't have a data dictionary where you can go and look up what those metrics actually mean. That's also an excellent technique. And what that will lead to is you will eventually get zero value with maximum effort and frustration. So your team will start burning out, but actually nothing is going to be done. The nice thing about this is they'll also start hating one another. So because they're so coupled, it's not directed at you, it's directed at them. So what that person they're linked to. So yeah, excellent technique for disempowering the team. Then another technique is to impress the Peter principle. So Peter principle states or refers to promoting someone to a position where they are set up for failure because they are not competent to do moving them to a position where they don't have the skill set to be able to perform well in that position. And again, that's a pretty easy thing to do. So all you do is you try and like figure out like who's performing well. You go up to that individual and you almost like force a promotion on them. And people like promotion, so they'll be promoted, and then check in again to see are they still doing well. If they are, promote again, up until the point they already have no idea what they're doing and they're just failing at the job. Peter principle isn't the only technique you can use. You can also use task relevant maturity, which was coined by Andy Grove. So that refers to the level of experience and skills someone has for a specific task. So example would be get your lead architect to do user interviews. That's going to be an excellent way to set them up for failure. And yeah, hopefully what will happen is like you will have a team where everyone fails and eventually leaves, and you won't have a team. So all good techniques for disempowering your team. Okay, so final chapter. I guess it is possible that you don't prevent innovation and you are unable to disempower your team. But if you create a toxic culture, that's almost like a catch-all. You will set your company, your team up for disaster. So if you were sort of sleeping in the other chapters, just listen to this one. Okay, technique 9, delay destructive feedback loops. So there's an excellent book by Kim Scott, Radical Candor, that provides us with a framework to understand like how we can create a destructive, destructive feedback. So it's there's like 4 quadrants with the horizontal axis going from challenging directly, so being sort of clear with the feedback you're giving, and then challenging indirectly, being vague, and someone not super involved. And then on the vertical axis, starting with caring personally to just hateful annoyance. So what you're aiming for is the top right corner. Challenge the person indirectly, be vague with the feedback you're giving them, but then also the tone should be something of hateful annoyance. So make sure that they're annoyed about like what you're saying and come across as hateful. But it's not just enough to have destructive feedback. You also need to delay the loop, because even with that type of feedback, someone can still use that to try and level themselves up. So what you want to do is you want to delay that feedback as much as possible, ideally like once a year or something like that, so that when they receive that feedback, there's nothing that they can do about it. So, and then what that will lead to is you will prevent growth, you will prevent unlocking potential, and you'll just have a lot of sad pandas that will eventually leave. Okay, technique 10, avoid addressing conflict. So again, I think going remote has served us well. Before going remote, you had to buy very expensive Bose headphones to filter out any conflict that you might sort of hear in the office. But now that you're remote, we have a lot more techniques that we can use. You can just like mute Slack or even quit Slack. You can unsubscribe to a repo. There's a lot of ways that you can just remove yourself from conflict. The challenge is that you want to make sure that your team sees you are avoiding conflict. So if you just leaving a channel on Slack is a good way to do that, because then someone can see you've left the channel and there's something happening there, or just going offline or something like that doesn't work as well, because then they can't actually see you avoiding them. And why this is good is that conflict fuels conflict. So it's almost like a vortex. Conflict left unresolved will result in more conflict. And that is the goal. Like, you want as much conflict circling around in the team as possible. Again, the idea is for you to not get swept up in the vortex, but to be visible enough that the team sees that you're ignoring it. Because if you get swept up, human nature is going to kick in and you might want to help resolve it. If that does happen, try and pick a side. That's second prize, but at least it's something. Okay, last technique, the 5 WTFs. So I believe that's a technique that was developed by Toyota as part of the sort of lean manufacturing movement. And it's an excellent technique to really focus on the individual and make them understand that they failed, and but not explain like why they failed. It steers you away from uncovering the root cause and just focusing on sort of creating a toxic culture. So pretty simple technique. It starts with just it's just 5 questions. So WTF happened, WTF did you do, WTF were you thinking, WTF should I tell the board, WTF are you still doing at this company? And the idea is that the process is get everyone involved together, make sure everyone understands who the person is that messed up, and then put them on the spot and ask them these questions. Ideally, you should capture this in a doc of source and then share it with the rest of the company, just to ensure that people understand like how issues are dealt with. And another cool way for this technique is that it's going to happen again, because you're never going to, using this technique doesn't allow you to find the root cause. So it's going to happen over and over and over again. And because using the 5 WFs ends with you firing the person, you will always fire a new person. So eventually you'll just clear out your team and be left without anyone. Okay, so Pandolf shared this in Book Lab, and obviously we pointed out that's not good advice, and was quite sad and despondent about like following the advice that Soren gave, and yeah, setting up this company for failure. Luckily, we also have Alfred from Batman, that's sort of part of OfferZen, and he gave some good advice. Why do we fall, Pandolf, to help pick ourselves up? And I think that's excellent advice, because that is what great leadership is made of. Good leaders sort of set themselves, understand their failures and set themselves up not to fail again. Great leaders are ones that sort of help others not make the same mistakes. And to that extent, I think Pandolf is excellent, because Pandolf has helped me and a lot of people understand the mistakes that we can make. So using that advice, I have a couple of techniques and tools, mental models that I use to prevent me from following Soren's advice, and specifically implicitly following his advice, because it's, I think, not being deliberate with your actions is one of the biggest mistakes a leader can make. As you see from sort of Pandolf's example, if you don't think about what you do, you will end up making mistakes. So the first framework that I love is the decision-making framework that we use at OfferZen. So I just want to shout out to Philip Hubert, our co-founder and CEO. He was the one that introduced it, and I'm pretty stoked about it. So when making decisions, it's important to understand the gravity of the decisions you're making. So Jeff Bezos, in one of his shareholder letters, sort of explained there's 2 types of decisions. There's type 1 and type 2. Type 1 is irreversible decisions. So that would be like jumping into a black hole. There's no going back from that, unless you're Matthew McConaughey, but the physics in that movie doesn't make sense. Type 2 is like walking through a door. If you don't like what you see on the other side, you can turn around and leave again. You'll expend some effort, but it's not impossible to return. So for type 1 decisions, we use the RAPID framework. It's an excellent framework to quickly make type 1 decisions, and I quickly want to share how we do it. So RAPID is an acronym for recommend, agree, decide, input, and perform. And those are the actions and responsibilities of people that are part of the rapid decision-making process. So it starts by someone explaining the problem, recommending a solution or decision or action. That person is also the person that drives the whole process, and they will be responsible for ensuring that it goes all the way. You also have people that are that fall within the agree bucket. So those would be people that are directly affected, but not the ultimate decision maker. So example might be you have the recommendation would be to move away from your application database. Data engineers being responsible for the governance of the ETL pipeline, they might they are directly affected, but not the ultimate decision maker. So they would need to be included as people that need to agree. Then there's only one person that makes the decision. And I think that's something that a lot of companies struggle with, because who is the person that needs to make the decision? So what we've done at OfferZen is we have created a list of areas of responsibilities, and we've made clear who is responsible for each of those areas. Because I think that is a big blocker for organizations in making top 1 level decisions, and will lead you to sort of decision paralysis. We also have, or you also have like people who's giving input. So they are people who isn't directly affected, but whose wisdom is appreciated. And then there is someone who's accountable for performing the action once it's made. It might be the person who's the ultimate decision maker, it might be someone else. The key is also to, from the start, set a deadline for making the decision. Because if you don't, then it's just going to be an undecided decision forever. So set a deadline and schedule a meeting to review the input from all of the parties involved and to make the ultimate call. And normally it takes between 1 and 2 weeks. For type 2 decisions, we've got a much simpler framework. Problem and proposed solution, or PPS for short. It's pretty simple because we don't want to introduce a lot of friction with type 2 decisions. So this is an example, which might be a real example, where someone explained the problem in a very succinct way and explained why this is a problem, and then proposed a couple of solutions. So the idea is that anyone can just do this, explain a problem and a couple of solutions, and then people within the team can give some input, and then a decision is made between 1 and 2 days. And because it's type 1, it's not, it is possible to revert that decision. It's also worth mentioning, both with especially with type 1 and type 2, we document the decisions, and because it's essential to be able to refer back to them sometime in the future when you want to understand the actions that you took, because no one's memory is perfect. Okay, sanity framework. This is my favorite. So going from 8 people to 160 has been quite challenging for me. I think on good days, this is how I looked, trying to understand like what I should prioritize, what I should spend my time on, how I should support people. Because I've read all the books, I sort of understand all of the ways that you should go about doing it, but collating all of those mental models, all of the techniques was challenging. So what I did is I embraced the working backwards methodologies from Amazon, and I started with what is it that I want to accomplish. So In scaling up, they talk about a sort of week plan where you essentially each week create a list of items that you're focusing on. You can include the OKRs, your personal OKRs, and how you're tracking against those, and like also what you did last week. And you can also, the advice that you shared with other people, because that builds accountability and asynchronous alignment. So I'm not following that advice completely, but what I did was I tried to understand like what sort of the way that I want to structure my week. And I created 4 buckets, focus being the main things I focus on, backlog being the items I would work on like once I'm done with focus. Wish list is maybe sometime in the future, not really important. And support is like, who are the people I'm supporting and what am I supporting them with? And that's what I wanted to end up with. So in order to create that, I first started with the question, is this something only you can do? And I think that's a really important question you should be asking as a leader. It helps you to identify, like, is this something that you can use to empower your team, or are you going to fall into the Peter principle? If this is only something I can do, I apply Stephen Covey's time management metrics to understand, like, if it's important, if it's urgent, yes, then it goes in the focus bucket. If it's important but not urgent, it goes into the backlog bucket. And if it's not important, then it goes into the wish list bucket. And that way it's a simple model, and you can do it on the fly whenever new things come in. For support, the first question I ask is, does anyone on the team have the capacity to take this on? If no, you need to repeat it back to you. You can't overload your team. If the team has capacity, then delegate it, but you need to understand the level of task relevant maturity of that person. If it is high, apply the management approach, low touch feedback, which is a way where you just check in with the person asynchronously on a weekly basis, giving them feedback. Yeah, it's a great technique. I'm quite a proponent of like it being a push rather than a pull, as in you are deliberately giving them feedback instead of them asking for feedback, because you shouldn't assume that you can just hire smart people and leave them alone and they'll succeed, even without TRM. And then management approach is for low TRM is high touch guidance. And that can be anything depending on the lowest level, is that a word, of TRM. So it can be check-ins of the stand-up, weekly pairing sessions. It really depends. But what's important is you need to add it to your support bucket, because that is something that you'll be spending time on. And yeah, that's how I sort of create my week plan. It's important to also reevaluate your week plan on a weekly basis, or at least I do. I also use sort of a green, amber, red scoring mechanism to understand like how well I did over the past couple of weeks, and try and write some notes if I have some time. Well, another excellent model is group health checks, which I want to thank Paul Barrett, our VP of Product, for introducing. So because we are a big team, obviously you need to do your obvious feedback techniques like regular structured one-on-one, skip levels, meeting up with the PM if you're the engineering manager. But if you're managers of managers and you've got multiple teams, like getting like a health check is really important to understand. Are there specific members or specific teams that are overwhelmed or bored? And what we've done is we've created this survey that we send out at least once a quarter to get a sense of like how the teams are doing, which I've found extremely useful. And then lastly, staying above the line. So staying above the line is a sort of a way that you can, at any point in time, assess where you are, where's your mental state. So if you're closed off, you're defensive, you're committed to being right, you're below the line, you're not going to be helpful to the team, you're not going to be creative. You want to strive to be open, you want to strive to be curious, committed to learning, essentially be above the line. And I think I love this model because it's so simple and so easy to understand and remember. And being curious is like something I've really personally tried to do a lot of over the past year. And I do want to thank Nick Witters, who showed me this model, and is also the person that's most above the line that I know. Cool, closing thoughts. So I hope everyone knows that Pandal's story is fictitious, so that's not real, but it is a useful technique. The inversion mental model is a useful technique to understand how the techniques that you follow to reach a certain goal might end up causing the opposite effect. So applying that as part of your mental models is pretty powerful. It did occur to me, like while sort of doing or cutting up the talk, that I'm not. It was quite painful because saying things like you need to disempower your team, you need to create a toxic work environment. Those aren't things that I think you want to joke about, because as leaders you have the responsibility to really elevate your teams, to really make sure that you unlock your team members to unlock their potential. So I think it was a good way to show what you shouldn't do, but I think it is important to understand the gravity of like our responsibilities as leaders. There's a quote, I believe, that was said by Batman, which is, it's not who you are on LinkedIn, it's what you do that defines you. And I just want to sort of advise being deliberate with what you do, with the mental models, the techniques that you apply in order to be the best leader you can be. I believe that is it. Questions, comments? Should I stop sharing?
Cool. Thank you so much for that insightful talk. I really enjoyed it. I'm sure the whole audience also loved the talk. Very, very different approach with that, the way you started with the techniques for terrible leadership. But I think a lot of people probably can relate to places where they've perhaps had a bit of a bad environment and can relate to some of the things you mentioned. And I think sometimes it's not, even as a leader, it's not like you're intentionally creating some of those things, but you might be causing some bad environment situations in your teams. So really, really appreciated the talk, and also the models that you shared at the end. So insightful. And I think for me, the best part were all the illustrations in typical OfferZen style. So
I need to
t-shirt ideas there.
I need to do a shout out to all our designers. I think they are the best designers out there. So
all right, cool. I think let's address a couple of questions from the audience, and then we'll wrap up. So I think Benny had the first question, which was, in your experience, has procrastination ever had a good result?
No, I think it's, and not to confuse procrastination with resting. So I think like being, being honest with yourself when you need rest and resting, I think that helps. But if you just procrastinate, which is essentially the act of not resting, but also not doing work, that has not helped, at least in my experience.
All right. Thank you. See Benny nodding his head, so I think he's happy there. And then we've got one from Luyanda, which is when I'm overloading myself with work, as in technique 6, I tend to drink a lot of caffeine, and this is bad for my system. And I've experienced problems with my health. How can I overcome this habit?
Okay, well, so I don't want to dive into, I don't have enough time nor ability to sort of explain sort of habit forming, but there's a couple of good books out there, sort of Atomic Habits, I think is the one that I would recommend, where they explain how you can build healthy habits and get rid of bad habits. Yeah, I don't have the material now to explain it well, so I would really suggest reading the book. But it goes about sort of understanding sort of what triggers your craving for caffeine and how you can replace that with something else that will achieve a similar result, and how you can then get your have a sort of a reward mechanism to enforce that behavior. But yeah, Atomic Habits, highly recommended.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, I'd also give a +1 for that book. Great book, an easy read too. We've got 2 questions from Richard. I'll pick one in the interest of time, as I think there's another question that's also following after that from someone else. So from Richard, we have, do you have any tips for choosing between a more soft skills leadership role versus technical leadership role within a startup? Specifically when you have aspirations for founding your own startup and want to become as equipped as possible before venturing out on your own.
Do you have any tips for choosing? So I guess what was, at least in my experience, quite valuable, starting in a startup and working in like smaller companies. I've never worked in a company larger than 8 people before OfferZen, is that you tend to develop both those skill levels as you grow. You might fall into a trap of not especially at a startup, like not being able to develop both. So yeah, my advice would be to be deliberate with what you choose and to pursue it, because I think it's not either or. You can pursue technical leadership and then sort of transition to sort of people leadership, and vice versa. But being deliberate with what you pursue will help you achieve your goal. What's quote is like, aim small, miss small. I think that's Mel Gibson.
All right, thank you. I will take one last question from the list. As I was scrolling down, I saw a few about people asking for the slides. We will get the slides, and we will also be sharing the recorded talk. So for everyone who did RSVP on meetup.com, we'll send out a message in the next few days with the slides and the actual link to the video. So you will receive that. But just the last question that we'll address for the day is from Leletu, which is, how can I work on my annoyance tone if I keep having to deal with one issue over and over?
So, just for people that don't know, there's a technique called the 5 Whys, which was actually developed by Toyota. And that is like an excellent tool for understanding sort of the root cause of issues coming up. I believe firmly that that's a tool you should use for any issue, not just like major incidents. And you can do it by yourself. You don't need to like grab the whole team, and that will identify how you can change the system in order not to sort of keep on having to deal with the same issue over and over. In terms of sort of annoying stone, I think that is that's what I sort of spoke about on the last slide about like being above and below the line. If you try and get yourself to be above the line, you would be more curious and less annoyed. And I mean, impossible to explain all the things you should do to sort of be above the line. But one book I would recommend that will help you is Leadership and Self-Deception, where they talk about being inside the box and outside the box. And that's analogous to being below the line and above the line. So I think that's a pretty good book.
All right. Thank you so much for addressing the questions. Yeah, just to get into the closing off bits, if you don't mind stopping your screen share, I'll just share my screen quickly and then wrap up. So yeah, just a bit of a repeat of some of the stuff from the beginning, just as a reminder. So again, just to thank our sponsors, Peach Payments and OfferZen, for supporting the community and helping us to host events such as these and the ones we have in person. Something I forgot to mention at the start is we actually recently changed our tech leadership website and added a few things. So we now have a tab that has recommended books for tech leaders. So if you are on the site and are looking for something to read that you have perhaps haven't read before, have a look at that tab. And then we also have a link to our recorded talks, so all the past talks, if you want quick access to that. I mentioned the newsletter earlier. So we release a tech leadership newsletter once a month. One is going out, it goes out after every meetup. So one will be going out this evening after this meetup. It's just a curated list of links to interesting content for tech leaders. I've just posted in the chat a link to the newsletter, and you can add your email and subscribe if you're interested in receiving that. We're also on Twitter, where we also share links to tech leadership content and content about upcoming meetups and events. So if you're on Twitter and you prefer following us through that channel, just find us at Tech Leadership X. And finally, you can still submit your details if you want to receive some cool offers and swag. Just follow that link in the chat again and add your details, and they'll be in touch if you're one of the people who is going to receive that swag. And to close off, once again, thank you so much to our speaker for the evening for an interesting talk. As is customary with the tech leadership group, we give out a book to the speaker, a book of your choice. So that is sponsored by Matchbox Solutions, which is Benny's company, one of the organizers. So we'll be in touch post the meetup and find out which book you're interested in. Sound like quite a reader with the number of books you recommended. So hopefully we can find something you haven't read before. And then thank you to everyone for attending. Quite a big group today. And for people who are here for the first time, hope to see you again. We announced at the beginning of the year that we're back to a hybrid. So we'll do an online one like this month, and then next month will be in person. So we'll let you know once we have confirmed the details of where the in-person one will be next month and who the speaker will be. But that should be it from our side. Thank you very much and have a good evening.